the the title of this sermon is The Value of Thankfulness, but I am going to talk a little bit about anti-Semitism. That kind of fits in. I hope, I'm digressing from my notes, but I hope that's all right. You might not know this, but the president, through executive order, is going to start withholding funds from colleges that are too anti-Semitic. Now, the reason that's surprising is there are a number of very liberal Jewish organizations, and some of them did support it, but there are some of them that did not support it. You're thinking to yourself, wait a minute, they're pro-Jewish, he's doing something to fight anti-Jewish hatred on college campuses, and they don't support it. There's some crazy stuff out there. And I'm not making this up because you think, he's making it up. No, it's true. Anyway, so the value of thankfulness. We have many things to be thankful for, as Mark just mentioned, being called by God in the first resurrection, and being in America, because it is a blessing to be in America. It really is. America was the first country to offer religious freedom. And now we all take that for granted. As a matter of fact, if you go through the Bill of Rights, the first thing they mention is freedom of religion. Then, of course, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, but religious freedom. And it goes, and I want to talk about what happened in Spain in 1492. I'm doing this to show you the importance of religious freedom. But probably there are more things going on in the world at this very moment. There are things going on in China and other places based on religion. Certain people were put in there. I call them gulags, they call them prisons, but you know what communist gulags are. So there's more going on even now, but in 1492, when Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue, that was not the biggest thing happening in Spain. For the Aragon throne, it was kind of like a minor event. They defeated the Muslims that year, and also the Edict of Expulsion was given to all Jews. They had 3 months to get out of Spain, taking with them only what they could carry, or else. And they had to convert to Catholicism. And those that did convert were called conversos. Isabel and Ferdinand issued that edict. Let me also, when we hear this, we probably don't realize what a shock that was to the Jewish people. Spain, for several centuries, had been one of the best sanctuaries the Jewish people had. Actually, when the Muslims ruled it, they were considered people of the book, and they didn't get persecuted. I mean, that may surprise you, but that's actually historically true. Some of the greatest Jewish writings, Maimonides, and I may not have pronounced his name, but you can look him up. Some of their greatest writers came from that period in Spain. And I think one of the worst things you can do to a human being is force them to do things against their own conscience. So the conversos were, actually the persecution started in 1391 by various clerics in the Catholic Church. And it varied from city to city how many were killed and different riots, but they were under great pressure to convert to Catholicism. Those that converted were called conversos. And you can just imagine how that would feel. I've got to pretend to believe something I don't really believe in, or else. And it was one of the greatest tragedies in the history of Judaism. When the edict was given, 50% of the Jews left, but 50% decided to go ahead and, by the way, prior to that, the century before that, a large percentage of the Jews had been pressured, frightened. The Spanish Inquisition was a terrible thing, let's put it bluntly, if you read about it. Had already switched to Catholicism. Now the remaining, maybe 100,000 or so, 50% left. Half of those came back within the 3 months that we'll convert. We couldn't find a suitable place to relocate to. It wasn't like it's sort of like if you took the Jews in New York City, who are very successful, and you told them, you got to get out of New York, you can't take all your possessions with you, you got to get out. It wasn't like they could just, well, we'll just go to Florida or New Jersey. No, there weren't a lot of welcoming places in the world to go to, for the most part. So that meant 75% of the Jews converted. Nothing like that's ever happened to Judaism, at least that I'm aware of. And they think some of the problem might have been the converters themselves. It depends on which class you're in. The upper classes, the lower classes, Jews got the worst of it, as you can imagine. The upper class probably did better. But a lot of the converters, probably upper class, it bothered them to have the Jews there who were still keeping the Sabbath and the holy days and not eating pork and certain other things, because it reminded them of, they're being intimidated. But there were a lot of forces that created this evil for the Jews. And you know what the greatest force was? It was a spiritual force, an evil spiritual force. And so I'll ask the question, why does the devil hate the Jews? The devil hates the Jews because Christ was Jewish. By the way, the new scholarship about, as they discover more documents in the Middle East, the new scholarship shows that Jesus was very Jewish. Now, we all know that, but to the outside world, they're a little bit shocked. Jesus was very Jewish, or leading Jewish rabbis, they might put it today. And all the apostles were Jewish. There might be one, if I say this, there may be one or two exceptions, but it doesn't matter. All the writers of the Bible were Jewish. Well, I consider Levites Jewish. It's the kingdom of Judah. So basically, they're all Jewish. And really, the true church of God was considered a sect within Judaism. I'll just read one scripture, but there are a bunch of others, including in Revelation, that you could look this up. I'm going to go to Romans 2:28 for the first scripture to make the point. Christ hates the physical Jews, and he hates us, the spiritual Israelites or spiritual Jews. Yes, I'm a spiritual Jew. Anyway, actually, I am circumcised. That doesn't really matter. I think when I was born, they had a Jewish doctor, but it's never, anyway, I'll talk about that later. Stay out of trouble here. Romans 2:28. For he is not a Jew who is one outwardly, nor is circumcision that which is outward in the flesh. But he is a Jew who is one inwardly. And of course, Jeremiah 31:31 and other places in the Bible, in the Old Testament, talks about it's conversion of the heart that really counts. He is a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart and in the spirit, not in the letter, whose praise is not from men but from God. So what Paul is saying is that a true worshiper of the true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, if you want to use the word Jew, that's okay. Paul is saying a true worshiper of the true God, or a true Jew, is one who is truly converted and, of course, accepts the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Ephesians 6:12. I'm only reading part of this section in Ephesians, but it just tells you our battle and the Jews' battle is a spiritual battle. Matter of fact, I was listening to Jaeger University, and the author was saying, I probably mispronounced his name, but I'll get it corrected later. He was saying that, I've got his Bible, he's a very brilliant guy. He was saying that a lot of Jewish philosophers had said every generation or so, another pogrom comes up to affect the Jews. And he said he didn't really believe it. He said, we're going to have many, many years. People learn their lesson. Anti-Semitism will be dead. He's shocked now to see it coming back big time in Europe, American campuses. He says they were right. The reason it keeps coming back is a spiritual warfare. Ephesians 6:12, for we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual host of wickedness in high or heavenly places. So who's the number one anti-Semite? It's Satan. and his demons. And they're kind of soft. Matter of fact, that story about the black Hebrews, and there are a lot of radical groups out there, weird conspiracy theories and anti-Jewish. There are a lot of weird people out there. But I read the Associated Press story on that, and it didn't mention anything about anti-Semitism. It didn't even tell you the color of the shooters or anything about their motive. And I think when the story originally was handled by the media, I believe they kind of knew it was anti-Semitism, but it didn't fit their political narrative, so they soft-pedaled it. So the truth kind of dribbled out later. The media hides a lot of truth. I just heard this recently. Do you know that there are more mass shootings in France than in America? We're shocked. According to the guy I heard speak, I think he's telling the truth. And other countries, including Mexico, a lot of other places, when mass shootings occur in other parts of the world, they don't get good coverage in the American media, or they're totally ignored. But anything bad that happens in America gets #1 media coverage in America and around the world. So we end up thinking we're worse than we are. I'm not saying there aren't a lot of bad people in America, but the media makes things look worse. Does that make sense? Because things that happen in other countries, they don't cover, or they soft pedal it. Like the thing that happened in that Jewish delicatessen. Exodus 31:13. Here's the sign of the true people of God. Exodus 31:13. Moses is quoting God. Speak to the children of Israel, saying, surely my Sabbaths. And when it has an S on the end of the word Sabbath, it means all of them. Weekly and annual. It means all of them. Weekly and annual. My Sabbaths you shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord, or if you like the English term, Jehovah or Jehovah, who sanctifies you. In other words, the weekly Sabbath and the holy days are a sign of the true God, that you worship the true God, the God who's the creator God, because he rested on the Sabbath and he created these holy days, which are a guidepost, as it says in Colossians, to his plan. And they certainly are. And the only people who keep those holy days are the real, true church of God and the Jewish people. That's who Satan hates. And I believe when Christians are such small, true Christians as we see it, are such small numbers, are often ignored in history. I imagine there were some worshipers of Christ who were among those people when that edict of expulsion came. They said, well, you know, if the Inquisition finds out we keep the Sabbath or the holy days, so they had to leave too. By the way, the Inquisition, their office was the office of holiness. You see the irony of that, don't you? There were Jewish people, they have historical documents, so they know this is true. There were Jewish people who were conversors, who went to the office of holiness, or the inquisitors, with a letter saying, would you please give us a 10-year grace period in which to adjust our body to pork? We just can't handle it. And at least as far as what I read, we don't know the answer that the inquisitors gave them. So we don't know what the answer was. But what the Inquisition also did, especially among lower-class Jews, who kind of married within the former Jewish people, so they kind of stayed the same. They said they were hunting down those who were trying to keep Saturday and Sunday both. And we're doing all the right Catholic things. And well, anyway, the Inquisition is an ugly part of world history, so I don't emphasize it, but that is a sign of the true God. And I believe that true Christians were also forced out and had to go other places. Now, the reason I'm mentioning the importance of America's religious freedom, because I think the Founding Fathers saw what happened in Europe, and maybe other places in the world, the Middle East as well. Islam has its version of it. In Islam, And in North Africa, as they went down the Nile River and villages in Africa and in the Balkan parts of Europe, the Muslims gave you, in most cases, three choices. Convert to Islam, and Islam is a master-slave kind of thing. That means you surrender kind of thing. Convert to Islam, die, or you become a financial slave, or sometimes a real slave. That also justified the Muslims selling a lot of my relatives into slavery. It's complicated. I'm not saying they're the only force that did it, but my point is it happened in Islam as well. And forcing people to go against their own beliefs is a horrible thing. Think of the mental pain and the guilt for years. So the American founding fathers kind of understood that, certainly better than most. And America was the first nation to ever grant religious freedom. Every other nation, you had a national church ran by the king or the emperor or whoever, or the caliphate. And also, even to this very day, America has the most freedom of religion. I've been very blessed, and some of you have too. When I told people my religious issues, at least most, I won't say no, but most, they didn't really bug me that much about it. They may didn't like it, but yeah, that's you know. And so I found that people in this country are pretty nice. By the way, do you know why hundreds of thousands of people storm the American border every year? Because in spite of what the media tells you about concentration camps, they know America is a free, open, generous, and prosperous society. They know that. They got friends here who have cell phones, from Nigeria or Malaysia. And actually, I believe people storming the border are from 124 nations, not just the 3 or 4 nations south of the border. So America has been blessed with the most freedom of religion. And I believe God has blessed America because of it. So we don't have to worry about pressures that are going to affect other parts of the world more so. I'm not going to read Revelation 13, 16, and 17, but it talks about not being able to buy or sell if you don't follow the religion of the beast. I think here's what I speculate. It will come around as earth worship, because that's really what global warming is, earth worship. Why do they say plant trees? That's the best thing you do, but that doesn't give them the governmental power over your life. And then it'll morph from earth worship to state worship, because the state is the one that's enforcing the rules. And what's the ultimate of state worship? Worshiping the leader, right? You look at Mussolini and the first fascists and Hitler. And by the way, that Heil Hitler was just Hail Caesar. That's from the Roman Empire. You all know that is coming. And more pressure in Europe will be brought. They're already doing it in China, as we mentioned before. It'll probably happen in Europe, Latin America, and other parts of the world. And in America, we're safe from most of that. And by the way, anti-Semitism and hatred of the Jews is like a canary in a mine. In a mine, they can't smell the poison, I think it's methane gas and maybe others, that the miners could run into, so they carry canaries in cages. So they look around and the canary is dead, they better get out of there because he dies first. But they know they can't smell the gas, they can't see it, but if enough of it gets there, it'll kill you, just like that. So anti-Semitism is like our canary in the mine. Satanic evil is growing. And I believe it's growing on college campuses, Antifa, and I've seen some Jewish speakers who just could not practically mob on our camp, run by government money. Wow, we're helping to support that kind of garbage. And in Europe, do you know that a lot of Jews in France are going to Israel now? There's so much anti-Semitism. And I grant you a lot of it is by Muslims, but not all. Even that, and I hope I get the name right. If I'm wrong, I'll send a correction. That Jeremy Corbyn of the Labour Party in Britain, he was anti-Semitic. Now, he didn't admit it, but he said things that were anti-Semitic. I think, wow. And he was the second most powerful political leader in England. It was shocking. As anti-Semitism grows, evil is getting closer and greater. Now, maybe it'll subside. We can hope for that. That it'll subside. The influence of Boris Johnson and Trump and others may push against it. And the other issue I want to talk about, the value of Thanksgiving. A lot of young people, I'm told now, no longer really keep Thanksgiving. Oh, it's a holiday, get off work, and maybe they eat some food on the weekend, watch some football games, but actual Thanksgiving Day itself, it's not that big a deal. And I really think that part of the problem is they have delegitimized Thanksgiving. Higher education, academia has delegitimized Thanksgiving. Now, of course, this is my opinion, but I believe I'm right. Okay. Of course I'm right. But anyway, but if you disagree, you can write Mark. So when the historians look at Thanksgiving, they can't credit a deity because they don't believe in a deity. They don't like God. They don't like the idea of God. So they want to undermine the deity part of it. And they just can't do that. And they don't want to credit capitalism because most of academia, or at least to varying degrees, they're socialists, communists, leftists. They don't like capitalism. Now, granted, the colleges have big funds, and a lot of those guys have big investments. It's sort of like it's two-faced. They teach against capitalism, but yeah, they take it when they can get it. You know how that works, but being hypocritical is not that great a shock. I want to tell this joke, and then I'll come back to what I was saying. This joke is, but the joke sort of has a point. It's called personnel request. Personnel request. The personnel office received an email requesting a listing of the department staff broken down by age and sex. The personnel office sent this reply. Attached is a list of our staff. We currently have no one broken down by age or sex. However, we might have a few alcoholics. Now, you're going to say, how am I going to use that? Here's how that fits, broken down by age and sex. It's PC culture is telling young people that you should not be thankful for being an American if you are a African American, female American, Hispanic American, gay American, let's see, I probably forgot, senior citizen American. I probably forgot a few subcategories. What is it? LGBTQIA. I think that's the new one. Anyway, and whatever subcategory I may have forgotten, you can't be thankful for America unless you're a heterosexual white male who's very successful. Those are the only ones who can be thankful. You see how silly that is? That is silly. But they're actually pushing that kind of stuff on people. And people should be thankful. There are people all over the world, literally, who would love to be in America. They walk across deserts and get on trains with dangerous human traffickers in Mexico to get here. And we're already here, and we should be thankful. Most of us have had a number of blessings. Well, getting back to socialism, Governor Bradford ended in the Plymouth Rock group, he ended their communal socialist thing because it engendered laziness. For instance, they had crops that rotted in the field, in the ground, because everybody said, well, we all get the same reward at the end of the year. Why should I go out there and dig it up and harvest it? Somebody else will do it. And it just didn't get done. And that, by the way, that's the problem with all socialism, communism. If there's no, human nature is such, if there's no profit motivation, laziness incurs, productivity goes down. Russia still is suffering to some extent from laziness from several generations of communism. So he switched them to capitalism. Every family got their own set of tools, seeds, land, etc., etc. All of a sudden, boom, the Plymouth Rock colony became a big financial success, and thousands of Puritans came over, and you could argue they set the foundation for the economic juggernaut of the planet. Do you know that by 1871, after the Civil War, America was probably the strongest economy in the world. Europe just hadn't noticed it yet. It took a few decades to start. Literally, was the strongest economy in the world. One more thing that you don't know. Governor Bradford said in his book, the Indians did help them. And I want to give the Indians some credit. They did help them the best ways to fish and the best ways to hunt in that forest, because they would know it. That's logical. What Bradford also said was they helped the Indians. Something I didn't realize, Britain actually was advanced in agriculture, for the 1600s. They were advanced in agriculture above the rest of the world. Certain hoes and rakes and I don't know that ag stuff, but how to get more out of your corn crop by the way you plant the field. As a matter of fact, one of the things that's most interesting, and as a retired professor of business, it's something good to know. Do you know who led the Industrial Revolution? It was Great Britain. You know why? Because British agricultural production in the 1600s increased, because they had better techniques, increased. And once you're no longer at a subsistence level as a country, you can take a part of the population that used to just grow food so you don't starve, you can move them into the cities for industrial production. And of course the expansion of the British Empire and all that worked together. So in other words, those people who came from Plymouth Rock knew stuff about agriculture and they helped the Indians. You never hear that side of the story, do you? Anyway, there's a lot more that could be said there, but America is still the world's juggernaut. I remember when I was, we had a lot of Chinese grad students, because they come to study business. And one of my grad students was a nice Chinese young lady, and she said, I hope I get to stay in America. Because she said, yeah, it's so nice and calm and friendly and restful over here, and in China, everything is so intense. You know, they work hard. They don't even ask you if you want to volunteer for overtime. That's just expected. So everybody thought with the Chinese working so intensely, America would soon fall behind China as the #1 economy. I heard that a number of years, 2012, 2014. You probably heard the same talk, right? It ain't happening. It's not even close. I think it was Friday or yesterday, whatever the date was. I think it was Friday. 2 of the 3 stock indices again hit all-time record highs. The Dow Jones is about twice what it was the day before Donald Trump got elected. I remember when he got elected, that night the stocks went negative in Europe. And they said, oh, the world is thinking that Trump's going to screw up things, the stock's going to go down. And they went down for a little while. And then the people in New York started thinking, wait a minute, we got a pro-business president, and stocks started going up. Now, Trump wasn't in office yet, he'd just been elected. And usually when stocks go up, the next day, profit taking, they go down, up, down, up, down. But they went up again. And they went up again. And I was like, this is crazy. I wish I'd gotten some money in at the right time. But anyway, that's another story. And they went up, and they went up. People said, well, this is before he even got to office. And then he came in office, kept going up, up. As I say, it's twice what it was the day before he got elected. I'm thinking, this is unbelievable. Now, I'm not saying that there are going to have to be some dips. That's the way the market goes, up and down. But it's up and down on an upward trajectory. And America is right now the center and the power of world trade. How about that for a shock? And the #1 producer of energy in the world. Would you have believed that? I mean, you throw in natural gas, we're doing more than Russia, Saudi Arabia, and at any rate. And all that started with Plymouth Rock. I'm giving a lot of other people deserve credit, the tons of other people give credit to as well. But I want to make that point. If you're in America, you have a lot to be thankful for. But first of all, we have to give God the credit. I also think America's blessings are not just because Americans, hope this doesn't offend you, but that Americans are smarter and harder working and braver than any other people. Because I had like Japanese students say, wait a minute, the Japanese people work harder than you do. I'm not denying that, by the way. Or other people would say other things. I think America's blessed because of Abraham and the blessings that God gave through Joseph, just like in the church's booklet, The U.S. and America and Prophecy. God has blessed America. Let me tell you how God blessed the Plymouth Rock. That will surprise you. Squanto the Indian was fishing off the New England coast, and the British fishing boats came along, and one of the boats, we're not quite sure how they lured him on the boat, but whatever it is, and they clapped him in chains and took him back to England and sold him as a slave, because that was money in those days. He spent 14 years in London learning the King's English, the way they speak it in London. And now the rest of the story is complicated, and I'll just pass through it with one or two sentences. Some missionaries came, converted him to Christianity, and worked out his freedom. And he got on another fishing boat, came, to fish off the North American coast. He jumped ship at about, the Plymouth Rock area. And a day or two after he jumped ship, he walked into the Plymouth village, speaking the King James English, and he could speak all the language of the Massasoit tribes that lived in that part of New England. Now they believe this is true. In that point in history, 1621, whatever the exact year, there's probably only 2 men in the world that could do that. The other guy only knew broken English, but he knew English well. God provided and he lived with them for many years. What a blessing that is. God provides you with a translator that probably nobody else in the world would know those two languages, and he knew English well. Now you're going to say, that's just a coincidence. There is no such thing as coincidences, right? That was a direct blessing from God. He knew the inside skinny on things in that part of the world. And so God did bless them. And of course they went to capitalism, which is a blessing. Also, some credit should be given to their European investors. As Ken Hartbarger II, we're talking about it, and he's reading up on their investors. They had at least 3 investor sources, and they should get some credit, right? And as more came over, they had more backing in Europe, and that, of course, makes sense. No one ever gives them any credit, but that's part of capitalism. Now I want to talk about the advantages of being thankful. But one more stupid joke. Throw in one more. This is called Thanksgiving Blessings. All the grandkids were visiting for Thanksgiving before dinner, and Grandma made a lengthy speech about being thankful and her extra blessings of her wonderful 4 grandchildren. Wonderful 4 grandchildren. As soon as the blessing was over, the 4 grandchildren started fighting over the smartphone and a bunch of other stuff and screaming and acting a fool. And grandmother closes her eyes and she squints. And someone asked her, "What's the matter, grandmother?" She says, "I'm just praying for a little patience to handle all these blessings." Those are the parents of teenagers, you'll understand. Yes, now my grandkids getting to be teenagers. Anyway, but if you're thankful, you will be happier. I believe it's an automatic law. 2 Timothy 3. I'm just going to read a little bit of 2 Timothy 3:1. I want to talk about this horrible spiritual wasteland that's out in the future of the world, and it's slowly growing. 2 Timothy 3:1. But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, unthankful. I'm going to emphasize that word. Unthankful, unholy. Now, how do we avoid the spiritual wasteland that's coming? By the way, I think laws are things that work automatically. You can't deny them. For instance, the law of gravity. You pick this up, it gets pulled back to the center of the earth. Nothing we can do about it. Or In business and economics, the law of supply and demand. People sometimes see, every time the government meddles and they think they can do something, that law comes back to bite them. Like when they do rent control. In the long term, they hurt supply, and that means prices will go up. Anyway, the law of supply and demand really does work. Anybody tries to defy it, they'll find otherwise. Well, there's a law of thankfulness too. I think law number 1 is God will bless you more when you're thankful. Here's just a question. Why was David a man after God's own heart? There probably were a number of reasons. He was brave and he had a lot of faith in God. But when you think of David and all the Psalms he wrote, which were music, we don't actually have the original music, and we hear it in a foreign language, and it's still impressive. Think of David laying in a pasture, looking up at the stars, and writing a song to God, praising God, thanking God, praising God's greatness. David loved God, and God loved David. I think that's quite clear. And the reverse of that is, if you're not thankful, you're likely to get less blessings from God. Now you're going to say, you can't really prove that. No, I can't, but I think it anyway. I think it. You're going to say. It just seems to me that God, now I realize God's dealing with us is complex, so sometimes blessings are not financial. And you can't always measure things by bank accounts. But I believe you are blessed when you're thankful to God, and you're blessed less when you're not thankful to God. Decadence comes with an attitude of ingratitude. And don't you see we're raising a generation of children who are spoiled brats with little gratitude? I mean, can you see it? Hopefully not your kids, but you know what I mean. Everybody's saying, yeah, we know what you mean. Romans 1:21. Here's what Paul says about mankind in general. Because although when they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful. In other words, they weren't thankful, but because they didn't acknowledge God and weren't thankful, they became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. And that's how the world has gone. Ephesians 5:18. And do not be drunk with wine, which is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit. Verse 19, speaking to one another in psalms. The kind of things that David did, those thankful praising songs, and hymns, and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord, giving thanks always for all things to God the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. As he said, giving thanks always. I would even argue, because you can say this about David, maybe when you're in a particular trial or something is tough, you can thank God for the trial too. It may produce in you something positive. But at the end, but even if you want to complain to God about the prayer, in your prayer about the trial, I think it would be best to end the prayer on a positive, thankful note. Saying, God, I know somehow you know this is best. I know you can say, when you're suffering, it's hard to see that. I concede that. But I still think it's a good principle. And the more contented we'll be when we're thankful. You'll handle the ups and downs of life better if you're contented. So we should celebrate Thanksgiving. We should be thankful. Philippians 4:6. Be anxious for nothing, or don't worry about things, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. So even if it's problems, still you can be thankful. And in the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your heart and your mind through Christ Jesus. So law number 3 would be you're going to be more contented and happy if you're thankful. You'll handle these things better. My last scripture, Philippians 4:11. Not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. Paul was saying, You know, I have my ups and downs. Sometimes churches really supported him well, sometimes they didn't. Read 2 Corinthians. Paul lived quite a life. But he learned to be content. I know how to be abased. I know how to abound. By the way, that's not always easy. A lot of young athletes, all of a sudden, they get $4 or $5 million contract. They've been a poor kid all their life. They get an entourage of followers to help them spend their money. That is hard to handle. They get hooked on drugs and, I mean this respectfully, bad women, other problems. Not that there are bad men too, but you get the general idea. Handling money, even handling popularity and a lot of praise, takes maturity. Does that make sense? Paul could be content. He didn't get too carried away. I know how to abound. Everywhere in all things I've learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. So be thankful. It's good for us. And even in a trial, be happy. Be positive no matter what. Remember, God is with us. And I believe God gets the credit for America's great blessings. I'm not taking anything away from all the good people who did good things too. And we're more blessed if we're thankful. We'll handle our problems better if we're grateful. And I believe those laws are sure. So look for the good things. When you look at your life, try to see the good things that are out there. Or say, well, even if I'm in a tough spot now, the outcome is going to be good. For instance, maybe you could say, God is teaching me patience. Or God is teaching me something so that in the future I'll be able to help somebody else who's going through the same problem that I'm going through. It'll be really important to me to learn. Or God is teaching me to be persistent. The one great thing about Winston Churchill, he said, he gave a graduation speech, and all he did was say, never, ever, never, ever give up. There's a lot to be said for that, right? Winston Churchill saved the Western world. The British leaders were going to sign a treaty with Hitler, pretty much giving him most of what he wanted. Britain would stand aside. Churchill turned that around on his strength of personality alone and his speaking ability and all that sort of thing, but he was persistent. Maybe God is teaching us persistence because we need to learn it. And I would just say, be faithful to the end.